Welcome everyone to another episode of Candor with Pres Eve. I am delighted to have with us Rick Sullivan, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Economic Development Council, and Trisha Canavan, also known as the Jobs Lady, who is the President and CEO of United Personnel. So great to have you both with us. Rick, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the great work that the EDC does.
Thanks, Eve. Thanks for having us. I am the president and CEO of the Western Mass Economic Development Council, which is a member-based organization which is really committed to improving the economy and the quality of life for everybody in Western Massachusetts, and not necessarily just our members themselves, although certainly we do work with our members, but it's really focused in with our new strategic plan, really focused on improving that economy and the quality of life for everybody. We certainly look to lead on the issues of the day, whether it's public health or transportation or energy, or the environment costs or workforce development. But at the end of the day, we are hoping to improve the economy and the quality of life for everybody in Western Massachusetts.
That's great. And I would say that your mission is more relevant today than ever. Trisha, I turn to you because I know you also bring a lot to the table. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about United Personnel.
Sure. Thanks so much, Eve. It's great to be with both of you today. I am President and CEO of United Personnel. We're a regional staffing firm focused on Central and Western Mass and Connecticut, and we strive to connect great people with opportunities that will help them advance their careers, and also work very closely with our client companies to help them develop talent strategies and recruit the employees that they need to be successful. In our work, we collaborate very closely with workforce development and other community partners to help create those pipelines for people to access great opportunities, and also work to make Western Mass a better place, and Connecticut as well, for people to live and work.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's just dig into it. You've both seen how the pandemic has affected our residents and our businesses in Western Mass. Can you give us a sense of what you see as the major impacts here in our region? And also, are we beginning to turn a corner here with vaccination being more widely available in our region?
Sure. I would kind of jump in here and say that, certainly I think on a personal level, I think everybody has been touched by the pandemic and the things that we have missed, whether it is business relationships, but I think even more importantly, it's those personal relationships. It's the events that mark families, milestones, and weddings and graduations, those celebrations, also having to say goodbye to people and, not being able to do that in person. So I think it has absolutely taken a toll on people individually. And I think that's across the board. And I think I think the phrase people are using now is just people feel exhausted. And I think that there is a lot of that. I think from the business point of view, I think certainly any business that is involved in hospitality, or, if you're an event type of venue, food, anything that is a gathering, really travel and tourism or destination point, your business was certainly dramatically impacted. And that may have had a little slight bump up during last summer when people could do some outdoor dining, particularly with the restaurants. But then, right now they are just starting to come out of it. There are other sectors that have thrived, and I think the word of the day has kind of been pivoted. So if you're in manufacturing, they're still pretty busy. And have been right along, and I think the future's bright. And I know we're going to get to that at the end here, but I think some of the biggest problems we have right now is actually companies and businesses finding employees to be able to take the jobs. So, I think it's apropos that Trisha's here, because I do think that is one of the biggest issues facing the economy right now in Western Mass, and I really think probably across the country, but even moving forward coming out of the pandemic.
And Trisha, are we turning a corner? What are you seeing? Is there a disconnect here between the jobs available and the people who are willing to engage in that kind of work?
I hope that we're turning, I do think that we're turning a corner in a lot of ways. I think that there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. I just got my first vaccine yesterday, so I'm very excited about that. I do think this summer we'll start to see more of a return to normalcy, but I am concerned in terms of the workforce, as Rick said. The labor force participation rate is very, very low at the moment. Actually, I just saw a report today that last week's jobs numbers, there were many fewer unemployment claims filed, yet we don't have the workers that we need either here at United Personnel, and every client company that I have is just really, really struggling to bring on workers at this point in time. I think that what we're seeing is that people are afraid still maybe of the pandemic, or they have kids home. There are a lot of financial supports at this moment in time, which are important. We want people to be fiscally stable and secure, but I think unfortunately in some cases people may be choosing to just wait things out a little bit longer, and that is making for a very, very tough labor market. But I think come fall we should see some improvement in that area, and I'm also looking forward to the kids being back in school full time. I think that will really be critically important, not just for our region's children, who I think crave and need that consistent presence in the classroom with their peers and their teachers, but also will make it more possible for working parents to be able to be back at work. So, just like the signs say on the pike, hope is on the way. So I think that we are looking to a brighter fall, brighter summer.
That's great. I couldn't think of two better people who have the finger on the pulse on these issues. I want to pivot, to use the word of the day, the word of the season, a little bit. And I'll start with you, Rick. Last fall, the EDC set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, a DEI committee with broad representation from your membership. Tell us why this was important to you. And Tricia, I'll also want you to chime in here. You are a very active member of that group. What did you want to achieve? What do you hope to achieve for the EDC and also for the communities that it serves?
So first off, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you, President Eve, for your leadership. You and Attorney Scott Foster co-chaired that initiative for the EDC. And it really spun out of the new strategic plan for the EDC, which recognizes that, we have a very diverse economy and a very diverse population. And if we are going to have a strong economy, it has to be a good economy for everybody. And that we had a lot of work to do, not just certainly as an organization, but really as a region, to recognize our diversity and to provide career pathways, at every level, from start, your first entry level jobs, and then having a career pathway all the way up to CEOs and board representation. That it was important that, all of our businesses, reflect the community that we are here, because that's a real strength in Western Massachusetts, and we need to start playing to our strength. So it will be an important part of, it was not just a one initiative. I think that was one of the things that we all made very clear. Certainly the committee made clear, the board made clear that, this was not just a one-time committee and our work here is done. This is a commitment to a diverse and inclusive economy moving forward. So we have a lot of work to do, but it's time that we did it, and we are committed to do that work.
That's wonderful. Tricia, tell us a little bit about your involvement and why this matters to you.
Sure. I think that certainly as a society, we've recognized a lot of, frankly, blatant racism and injustice over the last 400 years in the history of the United States. And I think the last year has just really finally gotten people to act in ways that previous efforts, the civil rights movement, ongoing efforts have achieved momentous things. But in my lifetime, this feels like a moment where people are going to act and act to address injustice, inequity, and inequality. And I think that for the EDC, we have a group of local businesses, colleges, nonprofits that come together to work to make this region a better place. And I think that we as an organization, as a board, as a committee, saw the opportunity to collaborate, to help convene members to talk about these issues, to engage with other community partners to help us better understand these issues, and to start to develop a plan. And as Rick said, to make a long-term commitment. I think it's a responsibility and an imperative that all of us have. And I really want to compliment Rick and his team, as well as the board, for being willing to engage in these conversations in a very deep way and to make a longer term commitment to it. And I think, also from a business perspective, we know that diverse organizations are stronger, are better. And so, again, the moral imperative is very, very clear, and the responsibility is very clear. But I think it's also important to recognize that this is good for business as well. So I think it's important to get the word out about the potential to make a very strong impact with the partnership of many. I mean, the EDC cannot and won't do this in a vacuum. But I think that at this moment in time, I think we have an opportunity to help make significant progress on these issues.
Absolutely. And I think it's both instructive and symbolic that the EDC, as a leadership organization in the region, take this and say, we want to be more inclusive. So Rick, I definitely echo Tricia in saying thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being inclusive in your approach, not just in terms of race, diversity, gender, and LGBTQ status, et cetera, but also in seeing that we want to see that diversity reflected across the hierarchy, across the ranks, and across job types. That's really, really important to have opportunities for folks. Now, I'm going to change the subject a little bit again. I want to ask you both about the East-West Rail. There's been so much talk about that, so much enthusiasm, and perhaps even a little bit of hesitation. Some people are saying, what might that do to the makeup of our region? What are some of the benefits? And also, what are some of the other things that we might need to prepare for? What are your thoughts on the East-West Rail, and what do you think would be the major benefits that it could bring to our region? Why don't we start with you, Tricia?
As someone who hates driving to Boston, and I have explored every possible way to get to Boston, not driving myself, including taking the bus, including driving to Worcester and taking the train, taking the commuter rail from Framingham. I am personally extremely excited about this, but I think that beyond my own enthusiasm, I think that East-West Rail offers some tremendous potential in a variety of areas. One is, we have a climate crisis. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we can take more cars off the road by making it possible to get to our state's capital city without having to get in your car, that would be a huge asset. The models that I referenced of transportation that I've used are fine, but a train would be wonderful. From Springfield. And I think in addition, we're very aware of the housing crisis in Massachusetts. We lack enough housing stock, period. We lack affordable housing. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to connect people to Western Mass, perhaps to live here and work in Boston. And for local residents to more easily be able to commute. I think we've all seen those articles in the paper about people that van share and they leave, from the Ludlow exit at some god awful hour every morning, like 4:30 or 5 o'clock. Like that's
even tough, earlier,
right? Or even earlier, right? To beat the traffic. So, so I think that it's a very, very exciting initiative. And I also think that this is what world-class countries and states have. They have really robust transportation options, public transportation options. And I think, we recognize that our infrastructure in the United States needs work. And I think that this is a critical piece of what we need as we're looking to invest in our infrastructure going forward.
Fantastic. How about you, Rick?
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of bring the political realist view to this, is that I do. I
Not
do
surprising.
Wait, Rick, am I not getting my train? Come on.
Well, as somebody who did drive to Boston every day for 7.5 years and was hitting the pike around 4:30 every morning, I think it is important to have, quick connections, certainly to Boston and New York and beyond. So I think that that's a smart investment, and the more of those connections that we can make, the better off we're going to be, just in terms of business relationships, and again, going back to quality of life issues as well. And I do think that there's a moment in time right now where you're having a debate at the national level on investment in infrastructure, which under anybody's definition clearly includes rail. And we are fortunate in Western Mass that we are well positioned for that discussion, as Congressman Neal is sitting as chair of Ways and Means. So I do think that as that initiative moves forward and that legislation moves forward at the federal level, there is an opportunity to find the funding to make that east-west connection, and then the state would have to come in, obviously, with some type of a share for that. I mean, currently there's $0 set aside by the state for east-west rail, just for in terms of design and construction. So that's just real. And so I do think that there's a moment in time that we can do that. I do think it's equally as important that we make sure that we make the investment in, broadband and internet and Wi-Fi services out here as well, for the same reasons, is that you need to be able to have those connections, and they have to be state-of-the-art connections. So if you're asking people to live in Western Massachusetts, not only do you need them to be able to, commute to wherever they have to go, but if they're going to be working from home, or studying from home, they're going to need those quality connections. So at the end of the day, I think that they are related. I also do think that they are both infrastructure, and we need to be making an investment in both of those types of infrastructure.
That's great, Rick. Anything else that you're hoping to see out of the president's proposed infrastructure bill? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as small in my definition of infrastructure as others. I mean, there's no question that we need roads and bridges and that type of infrastructure, but we absolutely need to work on our electric grid, again, across the country, but certainly, as we move into a clean energy future, we need to have a modernized grid that can actually accept the intermittent, wind or solar that needs to be able to go up there it has to have that capacity. So we need to be making investments there, water, sewer, particularly when you look at issues of water quality, with PFAS now becoming a bigger and bigger issue. All of those things I personally see as being, infrastructure. So I think that again, Western Massachusetts in particular could be well poised for some investments. I do think it falls upon people or organizations like the EDC to remind people that an investment in Western Massachusetts is just as important as an investment in Boston. And that is sometimes a difficult conversation, just in sheer numbers. They can invest $1 million in Boston and impact a lot more people than they can here in Western Mass. But that infrastructure is equally as important to our way of life, our quality of life, our business out here. And guess what? Right now we have the chair of Ways and Means from Western Mass.
That's right. Well, I couldn't think of a better advocate for our region and for our state than you, Rick. You have really nailed it. So our last question, is just a curiosity question for me. I'm very curious, particularly when it comes to you two, about what you are most hopeful about in this moment. And it's a toss-up, whichever one of you wants to start.
Go ahead, Trish. I always yield to my incoming chair.
Very smart.
I think I'm hopeful that we take the lessons learned from this hard time and apply it going forward. And I think that those lessons come in a variety of avenues or in a variety of formats. I think that slowing down a little bit is not always a bad thing. Appreciating what you've got. Who knew? I got to go to a client meeting the other day at their office. Who knew I'd ever be so excited to go to meet with somebody in person? Actually, Rick came to meet with me earlier today, so it's, I think it's been such a tragic and difficult time in so many ways. I I feel very lucky that my family is okay. And, I'm so grateful because I know so many have struggled, but, I hope that those are some of the lessons that stay with us. And that some of the things that have been highlighted for us by the pandemic, disparate health impacts, disparate educational impacts, all of these things that we can take this moment and move forward with a real commitment to addressing those going forward.
That's great. Tricia, and I'll ask you a follow-up question. In your work, have you seen any particular innovations that you hope people stick with post-pandemic?
I think it's so funny because my team has always wanted to work from home. And I've said, we're recruiters. How are you going to interview from home? And we had been using Skype for Business to interview people out of the area before we flew them in for, in-person interviews if they were moving forward in a process. But, I think that while I believe I'm firmly committed to us coming back, because I do think that you lose something in organic collaboration and relationship building when you're not co-located at least part of the time. I also think that we will take the lessons we rapidly pivoted to being completely remote, and we're still largely remote. I'm in the office today. We're slowly starting to come back, but I think that some of the technology lessons to allow for better work-life balance, I think, are things that we can take out of this. And I actually heard something very, very interesting. Someone with a disability, I think I'd read an article or something this person had written and said, this virtual world has made it possible for me to be much more included in things. Whereas before it might've been hard for me to, get somewhere, to go to something, but now I can participate because the playing field has been leveled because everybody's at home. And I think that that's an important thing for us to pay attention to. How do we use technology to enable more communication, better work-life balance, more access, while still hopefully being able to go back to some of the in-person sort of that spontaneous conversations and collaboration that's so important.
Fantastic. How about you, Rick? You get the last word. What are you most hopeful about?
Well, I think Trish nailed it. And I think a lot of it moving forward is going to be on work-life balance and the fact that there's going to be a pretty significant working from home or telecommuting from home in a lot of the jobs, not all jobs, but a lot of the jobs. And so therefore, people are going to be able to pick the quality of life that they want to experience for themselves and their families. And I think that that's a real opportunity for Western Massachusetts at that point, because we have just a great quality of life. Certainly the cost of living is lower. We have, outdoor recreational opportunities that you can't find other places. We are geographically close to, Boston and New York and other metro areas that if you really need to be physically there, you can get there in a reasonable period of time. And, we have, access to co-workspace and those relationships. And you may have seen that Springfield, but really the Pioneer Valley was listed as one of the top 10 places to work from home just for all of those reasons. And, I think that, there are some real opportunities for Western Massachusetts and its economy moving forward. I do think that we certainly have to make that investment in broadband and internet connections, because that does need to be state of the art. I do think that that's a real opportunity, particularly for some of our smaller communities here in Western Massachusetts. It may be the strongest and best economic development strategy that many of them have. And, you're already seeing it with some of the larger companies that are telling their employees, look, you're going to be working from home. So you don't need to live in Boston. You don't need to live in, you can choose to live in Western Massachusetts and have a great quality of life. So I actually am very bullish on the Western Mass economy moving forward. I think it's a great place to live, work, and play. And I think people are going to make that choice because at the end of the day, you can strike a better work-life balance here in Western Massachusetts.
There you have it. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. This was really great for our listeners, and I look forward to having you back at some other point. There's so much that we didn't touch on today. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Tricia, and many thanks to everyone for attending today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.